fellow bibliophiles, and welcome back to Blatantly Bookish. I'm Marissa, and today I am here with my belated June reading wrap-up. So, June was not the best reading month for me. I only managed to read 3 books, and they were all audiobooks, read, or listened to actually, on my drive to work. So, for those of you who are newer to my channel, hi, welcome, please stick around. I promise I usually do read more than that in a month. The lack of reading is partially because I was busy finishing my residency. Not only was I busier the last month of residency, but stress was caused by knowing that it was ending and that I would soon be thrust into the adult working world. It all led to some anxiety, but I don't really want to chat about that. I would rather chat about books with you, so here we go. The first book I finished in the month of June was A Man Called Ova by Fredrik Backman. I know a lot of people struggle with the pronunciation of the main character, Ova, but I'm going to go with Uva because that's how the narrator of the audiobook pronounced it, and I like to think that means they have some authority there. This has been going around BookTube a lot lately, and I just figured that it was a popular YA book. I even read the back, and it seemed very simplistic and completely uninteresting to me. But I actually started listening to it by mistake on my way to work. I clumsily pressed the wrong button on my phone while stopped at a red light, and I decided it was too dangerous to try and fix it while driving, and I'm so glad that I made that mistake, because this book is not YA, nor is it boring. It's about a man named Uva who seems like this cranky old grandpa of a man. He isn't actually a grandparent though, he doesn't have kids. But anyway, we follow his cantankerous nature and interactions with his neighbors. He is infuriated when people drive in areas that they're not supposed to on his street, and he'll actually come over and hassle them until they move. He also doesn't like how this cat always snoops around his lawn, and he calls it the cat annoyance. He actually develops his own grouchy nicknames for the people around him, like the cat annoyance, the pregnant one, and the lanky one for the couple next door, the youth for a particular adolescent that he interacts with in the book. We also discover that his wife has recently died, and we learn more about her and their relationship, and really the entirety of Uva's life throughout the book. It is fascinating how someone who cares so little about his own life and who views the world in the way that he does, who can be so rude and cranky, so rigid and stubborn, really does care about his community, and he ends up being the driving force that binds his neighbors together and fosters a true sense of community on his street. This book is a powerful exploration of love and loss and what it means to age and grow old and deal with tragedy, but it's not a sad book. It deals with strong and sad themes, but at its heart, it's about life and living and dealing with the change around you. It's such a touching story. It actually caused me to cry while driving. Again, not so safe at all. It's a wonder I made it to work in one piece. But it was a great audiobook for me too, because its language was so simple, but the messages that it conveys aren't simple, and they're touching without being saccharine. I highly recommend this one, even if it seems like it may not be the book for you, because I really do think that it could be a book for everyone. You may be asking why I'm holding a copy of this book if I listen to it on audiobook. Good question. After I finished the book, I was at my local library and I found a brand new looking copy in the library's free bin. So I love this book so much that I decided I would indeed like to own a copy of my own. The next book I finished was Victoria, Portrait of a Queen by Reef. It's a biography of Queen Victoria, and it was quite well done at that. It covered so many different facets of Victoria's life. It portrayed her as a very strong character, a tough cookie who held her ground even though there were constantly others trying to use her and manipulate her for their own gain. In this book, she's also constantly having babies, or babies are constantly being born. There were really just so many that I could not keep track of all of the births. Of course, there are some that are hers and others that are grandkids, etc. But anyway, people are also constantly dying in this book, and the queen is constantly in mourning for someone or other. I knew that a focus on mourning was a part of Queen Victoria's life, but I hadn't realized to what extent the role of mourning had in her life. From Prince Albert on, people in her life just keep dying. The book really touched on so many topics that it almost functioned as a history of England in the reign of Queen Victoria. There were so many different wars and conflicts that were mentioned, as well as prime ministers. The book explained the rivalry between Disraeli and Gladstone. It illustrated how haemophilia ran in the royal family, and it discussed the controversy of Queen Victoria and her accusation against Lady Flora Hastings. I also found its description of the Queen's relationship with a young Indian servant named Abdul Karim particularly interesting. I had seen commercials for a movie that focused on that relationship, but I hadn't realized that it was based on reality. So now I would really like to see that movie. I was also particularly interested in how Queen Victoria did not want her youngest daughter to marry because she selfishly didn't want her to leave her side. The book did a fairly good job of not making generalizations about Victoria's character, but based on the events of her life, I got the sense that Queen Victoria was a profoundly lonely person. I'd be interested in reading other biographies about her and seeing if that assessment actually holds up. All in all, I think this was a rather comprehensive biography and a great audiobook to listen to. The last book I finished in the month of June was the nonfiction book and new release, Barracoon, The Story of the Last Black Cargo by Zora Neale Hurston, edited and with an introduction by Deborah G. Plant. In 1927, Zora Neale Hurston went to Alabama to interview Cudjoe Lewis, African name Casula, the last living cargo of the transatlantic slave trade. At the time, Cudjoe was then the only person alive to tell the story of the Middle Passage. He was captured and forced into slavery 50 years after the Atlantic slave trade was officially outlawed in the U.S., but he had the unique experience of living in Africa, surviving the journey across the Atlantic in captivity, working as a slave in the U.S. for 5 years, living through the Civil War, and then being emancipated and living as a free man for 67 years, all before Zora Neale Hurston interviewed him. By the time Cudjoe arrived in the U.S., the majority of slaves were ignorant of African customs and traditions. They were already developing a unique African-American culture. The book does a really interesting job of exploring the tensions between Cudjoe, who identified as African, and the slaves whose families had already been on U.S. soil for generations, and just how Cudjoe and those who came over with him were in many ways outsiders. Cudjoe's life should be quite a story, and it was, but I was massively confused when I started the book because the introduction focused on Zora Neale Hurston's experience in gathering the information. The introduction also discussed how successfully Zora Neale Hurston actually excluded herself from the narrative and allowed Cudjoe's story to take precedence, which is really ironic because I felt that the lengthy and padded introduction had the opposite effect and actually undermined the narrative itself. I purposely chose to listen to this book on audiobook as opposed to reading it in hard copy because it is written in dialect. I find that when books are written in dialect, I personally get bogged down with the language. Dialects and accents, I think, are meant to be heard rather than written or transliterated into text. Still, I was worried that this dialect would translate off the page and would sound mocking or cloying, but thankfully the audio that I listened to, at least, did not make fun of Cudjoe or his perspective, and listening to it on audiobook was actually a really positive experience. I also watched Brown Girl Reading's review of this book, and I agreed with her on so many points. She asks the fundamental questions of why is this book being published now? And why is it being published in the way that it is? Meaning, why is the introduction needed, and what purpose does it really serve? For me, this story had so much potential, but it was effectively belittled by the essays it was packaged between. I don't think that means you shouldn't read it. I actually think that by exploring these questions, we can add more meaning to the book and what it says about our modern society. If anything I said interested you about this book, you should either read the book or check out Brown Girl Reading's review, or, both. So that is all I have for you guys today. Please let me know in the comments below if you have any thoughts on the books that I've discussed today. Maybe you could recommend some other Queen Victoria biographies. And as always, I welcome suggestions of books you think I'd like based on my reading each month. So yes, happy reading, and I look forward to seeing you in another video soon. Bye!